Okay, so my project is called Lost Wales 5 Porth. It's located at the top of Anglesey in Wales, and I discovered this ruin while on holiday. And what struck me about it was firstly its beauty, but also its isolation between the coast and the cliff line, and it really made me wonder why such a building was ever made here in the first place. So the first step was to look at the building's history, and I found out it was a Victorian brickworks that made silica bricks for the steel industry. And above on the headlands, quartzite was mined and brought down via inclined tramway, where it was crushed, moulded into bricks, fired, dried, and then exported to places like Liverpool. Today, though, it's a ruin. After the British economy slowed down in 1949, the site was abandoned, and in 1970 the seawall was breached, causing erosion on site, causing multiple buildings to fail and collapse. And right now, today, it's just been left to decay with no plans to save it. So this is where this kind of project originated, was how can we readapt such an isolated ruin in the 21st century. So my starting point was to look at the local area, specifically what it was known for. I found it had a rich industrial heritage. Paris Mountain, which is only a couple of miles away, was once the world's biggest copper mine. But more strikingly to me was its connection to the energy sector. Wilford Nuclear Power Station was Wales's only nuclear power station, which was on the coast, and it was decommissioned in 2018. I believe this has led to quite a lot of people skilled in that sector without jobs. Additionally, Anglesey's been touted Anglesey Energy Island by the government, with the plan of it becoming a hub for sustainable energy and a hub for decarbonising the British economy. And with the energy crisis happening right now, it became clear this project wanted to really deal with the energy crisis. So I discovered a journal online about seaweed and its potential for biogas energy. The idea being that seaweed as a species tends to have low amounts of a biological compound called lignin, which means it can produce a higher yield of biogas and potentially more energy. So I looked at the whole process and I tried to understand how it could be maybe farmed on an industrial scale. My first point was to look at where seaweed normally grows. Most species tend to favour shallower waters and for like an attachment point and for the gentle waters, but some also go offshore into the deeper parts of the coast. So here I started to look at some of the common species in the UK and how they could be farmed at more of an industrial scale, but while also not being a monoculture. And after this, I wanted to obviously create a biogas energy plant from seaweed, but because of the small amount of literature on it, and we don't know which seaweed species may be the most compatible and what maybe the temperatures to run the anaerobic digesters at, it became clear just creating a seaweed energy plant would not be just feasibly economically by itself. So this is when I started to look at maybe the different uses of seaweed. Another thing I found was seaweed can be used as a health treatment, combined with local china clay, it can be used as a spa wrap. And as the only growing sector in Anglesey is tourism, it made sense to create a spa that utilises the waste seaweed from the power plant, maybe the seaweed species that aren't suitable or are found to have more high amounts of lignin than the others. And it can also utilise some of the electricity and also the steam, because the steam could power and heat up the spa's pools. Meanwhile, the spa in itself could fund through people visiting and paying for the visits, the power plant, and also it can bring kind of more public awareness to the whole kind of idea of creating more sustainable energy sources. Once I sort of developed a brief, I wanted to look at what could architecturally drive the project. Now, what struck me when I visited Wales was it was had a clear Welsh identity. People were speaking Welsh quite a lot, which I hadn't really experienced before. So I wanted to look at the Welsh kind of vernacular architecture, specifically how they were constructed traditionally, and also what were the local materials, so I can introduce that into maybe the design. a starting point for developer design was to look exceptionally because of the site topography. And I wanted to firstly look at what the journey would be if someone was to enter the site as a person going to the spa. They could enter at the top of the cliff because it's the only reasonable part they could enter from. It could be a cafe that has kind of interrupted view of the surrounding landscape to kind of sell the scheme. And then towards the bottom, where all the kind of pools are and where all the other industrial stuff is, this is where, you know, you have top lighting solutions for more atmospheric spaces. And the same kind of happened, this process was for the seaweed factory. The idea being that, you know, a large contraption would pull in the seaweed straight from the sea to make it more efficient, sort it, place it into bins, and then place it into the tanks to create the biogas from. And in terms of site layout, obviously I was working within the constraints of the existing ruin, but I tried to set out placing the kind of main spa part towards the centre of the site where people could access it easily, while the power plant was close to the sea, and also introducing links from the Anglesey coastal path where I first accessed it from. In terms of plan-wise, most people would enter obviously on like the first floor, so it's almost like a reverse where you'd normally enter a building. So you step down onto the site, but all of the kind of spa power plant industrial stuff is on the base of the site on the ground floor. And then this is what I visualised the project to look like maybe after it's just been completed. So you've got the parts of the spa and the power plant, and then intermediately to link them to is kind of the industrial landscape with some of the tanks to create energy sunk into the landscape, so it's not overbearing to the site but still visual to the people that visit it to see what, you know, the main aim of the project is. So this diagram kind of tries to explain the circular economy of the whole thing. So at the very bottom of the site, you've got the seaweed processing building. Here it pulls in seaweed and will sort it into low lignin and high lignin seaweed. And it'll also have a nursery in it where it can produce seeds back to the farms to recycle the process. So some of the seaweed that's desirable for biogas can be placed into the tanks where it creates gas. But one of the byproducts of that is digestate, which is the solid component left. And that can be exported to local farms as a fertilizer. The gas is then put into stores and then placed to dry gas turbines. And this can produce steam and electricity, which powers the main spa baths. The electricity just powering all the lights and everything else, and the steam being used to heat the pools, various different temperature pools. And the wastewater from that will go back to the turbines to be recycled again. And then the undesirable seaweed for biogas can be used and added with local china clay, which is only 500 metres from the site, to create the spa treatments, and visitors and other goods enter through the top of the site. This kind of section shows the kind of interworkings underneath the kind of different spaces, how it would all work. So the turbines and the steam is taken towards the boiler and then to heat up the pools from the bottom. And the spa itself, again, it's similar to that initial section I drew, but the main spaces are the cafe, which has, again, tries to frame that view of the whole bay and utilises the traditional framing of Welsh architecture. The Victorian bathhouse, which was located in a weird spot in the original room between kind of this rectilinear old kind of stone buildings and the kilns, which are quite round. So it attempted to create these cone-like forms inspired by the kilns to, you know, bridge the gap between the two, but also funneling the light in an atmospheric way. And it also used this part of the site had a lot of brick rubble on it, so it attempted to recycle the brick as an aggregate in the concrete, in the board form concrete. And then the kilns, the central one's roof had collapsed, so I made it into a reflection space. So this is how people could enter the site. So they entered down from the cliff line. People that may be less, you know, accessibly challenged on other heavy goods. I've reinstated the old funicular railways. People travel down that way. They'd enter into like the main reception space where they can have a sneak view of what was to come. And then the cafe itself, again, has the cathedral-like crook frames and really benefits from its location up on the site on one of the old tiers. The some of the courtyards are ways of entering the pools, and occupy some of the like intermediate spaces of the old ruin. Yeah, the play building is sort of where people get their massages with the seaweed. It's something to the landscape a little bit. And then the seaweed factory, again, it pulls in seed, sorts it, and people who work on it could enter onto the docks, unload their product, and then in the main kind of seaweed factory, there's some chutes where it goes down to be sorted. And inside the seaweed factory, there's a small research centre where people can monitor, okay, what seaweeds are the most effective at creating energy, because that's the ultimate goal of this place. It's not to power the whole community, it's to understand how we can do this effectively to scale it up in the future. And then one of the other goals I haven't talked about was obviously retaining the ruin in a way where we can express what used to be there, but repurposing it in a modern way. So this is an example of the engine room, which is now the massage space within the building. Again, just concrete has been used just to support that old brickworks, and we're expressing it externally. And then technically, again, the idea was to express the old brickwork either externally or internally, depending on the space. But obviously achieving modern requirements in terms of values, lighting, etc. And then this is what the project envisages maybe in 80 years' time. Here you can kind of see most of the power plant has been somewhat abandoned or reduced in scale, because again, the idea is that once they've discovered, what seaweed species are the best, the biogas production, what temperatures to run it at, and they've done that research, they can scale up off-site onto a bigger site on Anglesey to maybe power the whole island. And then here we kind of envision that the kind of nature's took back, planting can go back, and also the thatched seaweed roofs of the original building have started to become green roofs, encouraging biodiversity. And also one other problem, although this site originally is 6 meters above the sea level, it's got quite high sea walls. In the future, the sea level could rise, and this might have to start becoming a more defensive landscape. And at some point, maybe in the far distant future, might have to shut the site down completely. But yeah.